yet, but I imagine that people will be logging on. So we'll get started with today's event. Thank you very much and welcome everyone. I would like to begin with an acknowledgement of country, and in the spirit of reconciliation, the Committee for the Hunter acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders people. Today, you might like to acknowledge what country you are coming from today. I'm talking to you from Lake Macquarie, which is the Awabakal people's land. So thank you very much everyone for joining us for a very important discussion on the draft Hunter Water Security Plan, currently on exhibition and comment in the Hunter website. And no doubt you will have all received some materials in your letterbox as well, and hopefully you've done your homework and come prepared with some questions for Darren and the panel today. Really pleased to host this event today with Hunter Water and welcome Managing Director Darren Cleary as our keynote speaker. First up today, Darren will be presenting on the draft plan, and then he'll be joined by a panel of experts, including Danielle Francis of Water Services Association Australia and Professor Roberta Ryan of our own University of Newcastle to discuss the plan. We'll be talking about the importance of water services in planning for growth, prosperity, livability, and also in the context of a changing climate, and also community attitudes towards water and its management. And it's, a really strong theme of the development of this plan has really been quite extensive consultation and engagement with the community. Planning for growth and economic diversification, these are priorities that have been identified by the committee in our new strategic plan that can be found up on our website. Jen, perhaps you might want to provide a link to that in the comments box down the bottom. The centrepiece of our efforts over the next year is really the development of an ambitious vision of growth for the region focused on a target for new jobs. This will bring together our initiatives in a unifying framework and describing how the economic, social and sustainability priorities leverage each other in an integrated plan for our region's development. The vision will also provide a really compelling vehicle to engage with decision makers, government and non-government, on the Hunter's capacity for growth and what it takes to get there. We're also not just focused on growth for the sake thereof, we're focused on shared prosperity and really how these benefits are shared across the communities of the Hunter region and how growth works to increase the living standards for all. Now, water, as we all know, is critical to servicing that growth, livability and sustainability. And Hunter Water's draft plan aims to ensure that the region has a resilient and a sustainable water future that contributes to our health and prosperity, and that it's supported by our community. I'll hand over to Darren in a moment to provide some more detail on that. But just in terms of the session, Darren will give a keynote address, followed by the panel discussion, and then I will facilitate, then there'll be an opportunity for Q&A at the end. So please feel free in the chat box to put your questions there as we move through the session. We'll attempt to answer as many of these as possible, may consolidate them into themes as these emerge. But also, if your name and organisation, these titles aren't clear on your link, on your Zoom profile, please just put that in your question. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Darren.
Thank you, Alice, and welcome everybody. Really pleased to be here today to talk about the Lower Hunter Water Security Plan, which is the culmination of many years of planning for Hunter Water. And very excited to have this plan out on public exhibition to be continuing to engage with our community around our long-term water security and how we ensure that we can meet the community's water needs and deal with a whole range of potential disruptions, not the least being climate change and potential drought. So I'd also just like to acknowledge that Hunter Water operates across the traditional country of the Awabakal, Lepai, Darkinjung, Wanneroo and Warramai peoples. We recognise and respect their cultural heritage, beliefs and continuing relationship with the land, and acknowledge and pay respect to elders past, present and future. Now, last week, Infrastructure Australia released their next draft of the Australian Infrastructure Plan, looking at the role infrastructure plays in supporting our overall well-being and economic prosperity. And one of the key focus areas in that plan is around sustainability and resilience. And importantly, one of the key focus areas is also water. There's a number of observations that Infrastructure Australia make with respect to water, but there were two key comments I just wanted to highlight. And this is Infrastructure Australia's view of water management across the country. And so Australians will have to move from an expectation that water is always available in all circumstances to an understanding that this country needs a more resilient network using a broader set of potential water sources. And they also say that new approaches are needed to managing water infrastructure to cope with the pressures of climate change and population growth. And the plan that we've now got out on public exhibition is really focused on managing, the challenges that are summarised in those two quotes, and that are common really across the country. And what we are looking to do is to come up with a plan that is based upon community values, that reflects what's important to our community, so that we can continue to support the economic prosperity of the region and the livability of the region. Another report that's been released was in early August was, of course, IPC6, looking at our understanding of climate change, looking at all of the evidence. Now, there's huge amounts of information in that report, but there's just two key things I just wanted to highlight today. So we know there's a range of potential scenarios with respect to climate change, and actually some of them are quite challenging. We know one of the key impacts from climate change is likely to be more frequent droughts, I should say. And so the figure on the left shows the likelihood of increased drought depending upon the future global warming scenarios. So under all the scenarios that are being contemplated, drought is likely to occur much more frequently than we have currently seen. Another issue for water management that's quite important is extreme heat, and this really goes to the livability of our urban areas in particular. And we know under the global warming scenarios that are on the right, extreme heat days are actually much more likely to occur than they currently are. And this is a really important thing to reflect on when we talk about water management, because it's not immediately obvious the important role that water plays, particularly with respect to cooling of urban areas. And it's a particular function that we need to be very deliberate about thinking through how we ensure that we have enough water to help manage what is likely to be an increasingly challenging climate for us with these more extreme heat days. Now, bringing it back down to the local level, the plan covers what we generally refer to as the Lower Hunter. So Hunter Water, we service a population of just over 600,000 people, focused on the local government areas that are in the lower part of the Hunter region. So Cessnock, Dungog, Lake Macquarie, Maitland, Newcastle, and Port Stephens. And we do service a small part of Singleton Council, only a very small part, but of course Singleton Council does have their own water supply authority and provides those services to the majority of that area. So we're talking about a fairly large and diverse urban area that also goes into some some important rural and industrial lands as well. Now, currently, all of the water that we get from, that we harvest and supply to our region is based upon rainfall, of course. So the majority of our water comes from the Williams River system. We have a dam at Chichester on the Wangett and Chichester rivers, and then we have another large dam at Grahamstown, and that comes off the Williams. And of course, anything that overflows from Chichester Dam goes down the Williams, and we have the potential to capture some of that at Grahamstown as well. Another key part of our water source are the Tomago sand beds, and these are a shallow superficial aquifer that in essence are recharged by rainfall. So those sources make up 90% of the water that's provided to the region. So a highly reliable system under most conditions, very coastal, these dams, the Chichester dams and the Barrington tops, so very good at capturing those those southerlies, that wet airstreams that come through and getting precipitation. Most of the time very reliable, but nevertheless they certainly are vulnerable to drought, and we've seen that in the most recent drought in 2019. So what is the challenge for this region? The biggest challenge we do have is that we are vulnerable to drought, and although our storages are reliable under most conditions, they're actually quite small in comparison to our demand, and they can empty very quickly. They're also can experience quite high losses, particularly Grahamstown Dam. So it's our largest dam. It's a very shallow dam with a large surface area, and we can lose as much water to evaporation in summer as we supply to our customers. customers. So we can have quite high natural losses. So what this graph shows is really the essence of the challenge that we face currently. The green at the top is our normal operating range for our storages. So under most conditions, our water storages are between 70 to 100% full, and they go up and down quite rapidly in response to rainfall. So within that operating range, we don't know whether we're in a normal climatic sequence or not. Once we get below 70% storage, then we've got a strong indicator that we're in a drier period than normal. And if we were to do nothing, if we were to continue to operate, then we could go from that normal operating range to a critical operating range, where in essence we're basically empty in 2 years, and that's quite a rapid depletion. Now, of course, we don't do nothing. We currently do have a drought management plan. Importantly, what we do is we have a link with the Central Coast, our neighbours, and we operate the water storages, so their dams and our dams, as a single system, and we have a management arrangement in place with them to do that. And we know by sharing water between the regions, we optimise the capacity of the overall system, and the yield from our overall system increases. So we do that to make sure we make the most of what we have. As our storages fall due to dry conditions, we progressively bring in restrictions. So we work with our community to reduce their demand, and in particular reduce outdoor demand. So we have restrictions that are progressively more stringent as water storages fall. And if we would ever get to level 3 restrictions, at that point we'd be banning all outdoor water use, and that's quite significant. I mean, it is done so that we can significantly reduce demand, but we also recognise that doing that does have a significant impact on potential well-being, because not only do gardens die and green spaces die, but important things like sporting facilities and parks that communities use also become not usable. If water storages would continue to fall, then we would look to bring in a desalination plant to be operational by 15% total storage, and that would provide around 20% of our demand. So the challenge that we face is that if we bring into place all of the restrictions that we have, and we work with communities to really drive water conservation as far as we can, and we work with, that includes our commercial and industrial customers, the minimum demand that our community requires, that we need to meet with water, is about 125 megalitres a day. What we know we can guarantee in terms of water supply, if we have a severe drought that would occur, is about 60 megalitres a day. So we can get 30 megalitres a day out of our drought response desalination plant, and based upon historic records, we assume we can continue to get 30 megalitres a day out of our Chichester dam system, because it comes off the Barrington tops with a number of hanging swamps, and that will continue to produce water. So we have this gap between the minimum demand that the community expects of 125 megalitres a day, and what we can supply, that enduring supply number, which is 60 megalitres a day. So that gap of 65 megalitres a day, in essence, is if we were to reach that point, our current water supply system wouldn't function as it currently does. So what we'd be looking at is a scenario that is similar to what Cape Town faced in 2018. So many people would remember day zero at Cape Town. It became, around the world, fairly well known that Cape Town was running out of water. They got to 3 months before they were going to run out of water, and day zero became part of the popular lexicon because of that. So in that scenario, what Cape Town were talking to their residents about was a water ration of 50 litres per person per day. That's what they were allowing. And what that looks like is you don't get water out of your tap at home. You need to get a bucket. You need to walk down the end of the street to a common fill point and get your water from there. So, basically schools have to shut, industry is largely shut, and your basic water needs are met in that very, very rudimentary way. Now, this scenario we're talking about, if we were to experience this sort of drought for the hunter, would be what we would be facing. So the 60 megalitres a day we can guarantee we supply is about 50 litres per person per day. So it's roughly equivalent to the Cape Town scenario. So this is our challenge. Now, what's the likelihood of this happening? It is unlikely. We need to be clear though, we can't reliably estimate the probability of it occurring. It is unlikely, but clearly the consequences are quite catastrophic. And the other challenge with respect to this sort of scenario is, given the demand that we are talking about, 125 megalitres a day, the demand for 600,000 people, the only way to meet that demand is by providing significant infrastructure to produce water. We cannot bring water in from another region by temporary means, such as freighting it in by road or by rail, the demand is just too large. And we saw that we learnt that from the last drought. The sort of the largest town that you can reliably temporarily bring water into is somewhere around 10 to 20,000 people, nowhere near 600,000 people. So if we want to manage this risk and ensure we don't face this scenario, we need sufficient time to deliver infrastructure that can meet our water demands. So this is really the essence of the challenge that the plan is trying to grapple with, and we do want to be adaptive here, because we need to also face or recognise the fact that this scenario of a really severe drought is unlikely. We don't want to overinvest, but yet we need the ability to respond in the event that it may occur. And particularly climate change is presenting a particular challenge around what is the likelihood of this sort of scenario occurring. It's just very, very difficult to forecast. Now, a key part of being resilient to this sort of scenario is making the most of what we have. So Hunter Water's had a strong focus on being as efficient as it can be with how it produces its water and provides it to its customers. So we've had a strong focus on reducing leakage. We've brought that down over the last 5 years by 34%, and we're going to continue to focus on bringing that leakage level down to ensure we're making the most of what we have. We've also had a very strong focus of working with our community with respect to water conservation. What this graph shows is the orange line shows the predicted demand that the community has for water given climatic conditions. So demand for water clearly is going to be greater when it's hotter, because particularly outdoor water use is dependent upon climate. And so this graph shows what demand from the community would be given climatic conditions, and the blue shows what we've observed. So you can see back in the drought, we predicted demand would be very, very high given the climatic conditions, and community responded fantastically to our Love Water campaign and really had a strong water conservation ethic. What's been particularly encouraging is we've continued to work with community, and a lot of that water conservation behaviour has been retained. So you can see, even though the drought has ended, the blue line is significantly below the orange line, and so we're seeing about a 9% reduction in demand compared to predicted demand given the climatic conditions and what our community is actually using. So now we still have to continue to work with community to hopefully maintain that and continue to grow that level of water conservation. Nonetheless, using things as efficiently as possible is absolutely essential, but it's not sufficient. So as that previous chart shows, even if we were to get our demand down to a very, very low level of 125 megalitres a day, and that's equivalent to 100 litres per person per day, that's well beyond any level of water conservation we're currently seeing. We still need additional supply to ensure we don't run out of water. So this is the challenge that the plan is looking to address. So our existing demand for water exceeds the sustainable supply of our system. And this has really been informed over the last few years, particularly our knowledge of the most recent drought, reconstructing what our historic climate has been, and what we're seeing happening with climate change. It's also been significantly informed by the views of our community. So we've prepared this plan, the Hunter Water Security Plan, and its aim is to really provide a robust system that can adapt and respond to future uncertainties and meet future water needs. Now, it's important to recognise there are a number of uncertainties in the provision of infrastructure that we have to acknowledge. I mean, climate change and drought is clearly one of them. Changing community expectations is another, the level of growth that we're likely to see, as well as technological changes. So our plan needs to be adaptive to these sorts of challenges and opportunities, and that's one of the things we're trying to build into the plan. We're certainly aiming to protect and restore ecosystems, to provide high quality and affordable services, to have a plan that is supported by our community and promote health and wellbeing, and to be transparent and collaborative in the preparation of the plan. Now, there's some trade-offs amongst all these goals. They're aspirational, and we are aiming to achieve as many as we can. And part of the engagement and consultation, including this public exhibition period, is to really reflect on how well are we delivering against these and where some of those trade-offs may have to be. We've gone through a fairly extensive process to prepare this plan, and as I said, it has been underpinned by community engagement, and we've sought to really understand communities' values with respect to the provision of water supply, and then what do they value around the various ways of meeting their water needs. So community engagement has been embedded in the development of the plan. We've also recognised that community engagement can be challenging, and there's no one way that is perfect. There's no silver bullet to community engagement. Many types of engagement have their advantages, but communities but they also have some limitations. So we've tried to take a multi-factorial approach to doing this, and look at really lots of multiple evidence sources of what the community really think, and also recognising that community attitudes will change and adapt as their own experience grows. We've also underpinned the development of the plan with significant technical studies, so economic investigations, financial, understanding the environmental and social impacts of various options, and then stress testing those with scenario testing and adaptive planning to understand if various futures were to arise, does that change our decision making? And that's all fed into the plan that's currently on public exhibition. So when we went to the community, what did we hear? We heard that by far their most important value was a safe and reliable water supply that can withstand drought. And the focus on safety of the water supply was actually really quite strong. So that's not just from a reliability supply, but also obviously from a health and wellbeing perspective. So there's a high level of trust in the services that we provide, and the community very clearly stated that they have a strong expectation that we will continue to provide safe water. There was also a strong view that all options should be considered from the community. So when we went to the community about what they value and we asked them about various options, there were differences between option types, but the vast majority of people were open to considering all options. That doesn't mean they favour one option over another, but they're certainly willing to consider options and see the detailed analysis and then make a decision on that basis. There's a clear preference to invest to reduce demand for drinking water. That's both from a leakage perspective in our system, but also working with community to reduce their demand and reducing demand for drinking water through the use of recycled water. There was strong support for minimising environmental impacts of water supply initiatives, and there was an expectation from community that we would be collaborative with community and stakeholders in delivering this plan, that it wouldn't just be a Hunter Water view, it would be a regional view, and we'd be working with our partners to get the best outcome. From our perspective, it was interesting, community strongly supported the continued use of water restrictions. So even though water restrictions can be quite severe, as I touched on earlier, they can lead to us banning outdoor water use, the community clearly showed strong support for saying under those severe drought conditions, they should reduce their water demand. In other words, they think that's a sacrifice that should be made to reduce water demand, and also and therefore, by definition, reduce the need to invest unless it's absolutely necessary. They also did say that they want to ensure we don't run out of water, and therefore some upfront investment is supported, as opposed to purely reacting in drought. So that's a summary of the community engagement that we and the views of the community that were expressed through that significant engagement. So from that, we've developed 4 strategic priorities in the plan. The first one is safe drinking water, and that's recognising the safety of drinking water starts from our catchments, our drinking water catchments, and how we manage that through to delivery of water to our customers. And that safety of water also extends to recycled water. Priority 2 is making the most of what we've got, and as I've already touched on, there's clearly a strong expectation that we would continue to be as efficient as we can with the resources that we have. There's a priority about improving the resilience of our system. So even if we are as efficient as we can be, we do have a challenge with respect to drought in particular, and that problem will only become more challenging as the population of the region grows. And so we know currently the region has grown very steadily over the last 25 years at about 1% per annum, and the forecasts are, as a minimum, that's likely to continue. What we're seeing at the moment is actually much stronger growth. The resilience of the system is going to continue to be tested as that population grows. So we have a strong focus on how we improve the resilience of a system. Priority 4 is about water for life, and recognising the water is an essential part of our country and its importance to Aboriginal people, and look at how we can continue to work with Aboriginal people in the region and more broadly to ensure that their values are reflected in our planning, and that we're supporting their communities. So where did all of this lead? what we've proposed is that we would continue to invest and actually increase our investment in water conservation and recycling. We're proposing that we would construct a desalination plant at Belmont upfront, and that plant would, under average climatic conditions, would operate in a minimum supply mode, and as drought were to unfold, its capacity would ramp up as water storages fell. We propose that we'll have a connection with the Upper Hunter. So a key part of resilience is making the most of what we've got and recognising that we are part of a broader region. So the connection with the Upper Hunter is looking at connecting into 2 dams in the Upper Hunter, Lostock and Glennies. There's a proposal that's being considered by the state government and Water New South Wales, who owns that infrastructure, to connect those 2 dams, and that connection will generate additional water available in the system. And there's a proposal that we would link into that and get an allocation of some of that additional water that will become available from optimising the use of those 2 water storages. We're proposing that we'll have readiness activities to respond to drought. So the desalination plant at Belmont wouldn't meet our full demand, our minimum community demand in a drought. So we are doing additional readiness activities to allow further desalination to be deployed if we were to get into a severe drought. But importantly, we would not deliver that. That would only happen if we got to very low water storage levels. And that's about optimising investment and ensuring we don't overinvest now and put in place desalination capacity that may not be needed unless we were to get to reach a severe drought. We're also planning to do readiness activities for purified recycled water. So this is where we get highly treated wastewater and put that back into the water supply system through our major dam at Grahamstown and use it as part of the water supply. Now, this is an option which is used throughout the world, and our community has told us that it is an option that they're willing to consider. So what we're proposing is a demonstration facility that would allow us to continue to work with community to explore that option, understand their views, and have it available as an option for future expansion of our water supply system for growth. We're also proposing a range of planning and policy actions, particularly around how we continue to work with planning authorities, so Department of Planning, Infrastructure and Environment, and local government around the provision of new growth and how we can continue to encourage water conservation both in new development and existing developments. As I've touched on, there's also a drought management plan, so that is the delivery of additional desalination capacity if we were to hit really low water storage levels. Of course, this all requires investment, and the upfront actions that we're proposing will flow through to customer bills, and the indicative bill impact is, as it says on the slide, $75 to $120 per year, a one-off increase, and that's a 6 to 9% increase on an average customer bill. This is what that investment does for us. So as you see, we're proposing we do augment our supply with Belmont and then the Lostock Glennies system, and that brings our supply up above our projected demand, which is the blue dotted line. So you can see that is projected to grow, and that growth is based upon population growth. So we are assuming a high level of water conservation in our existing community and in our new growth as it occurs, and those 2 investments will take our sustainable yield above our projected demand. And importantly, what it does give us, it gives us more time to respond in drought. So if we were to hit a severe drought, the likelihood of having to invest in additional desalination capacity is substantially reduced, and it gives us the time to respond and deliver that sort of infrastructure if it is required in a way that helps us reduce cost and also ensures that we have time to deliver that significant infrastructure. Given the growth that's projected in the community, we are proposing that purified recycled water would be an option that's available to us to service that growth as projected demand hits the yield of our system. The plans are currently on exhibition. It's open until the 26th of September. You can find the details on our website, on the Your Voice website, and we'll be based upon the feedback we get from the plan, we'll be finalising that and then taking that to Cabinet. This is a whole of government plan, so it is a plan from New South Wales Government, and we're taking that for consideration of New South Wales Cabinet in early 2022. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Darren. That's been a really comprehensive approach really to long-term planning for one of our most precious resources that we have. And I think, you know, Roberta might talk a little bit more about this in our panel discussion, but certainly the kind of, you know, the broader understanding when you go to the community and you say, you know, we're growing, what do you need? It's really that the infrastructure and the services accompany that growth. It's all about trade-offs. You've pointed to a range of actions. It's not just infrastructure, it's also about policy and reform and regulation and that greater efficiency. But, you know, well done on getting it over the line in terms of there are investments to be made to get that secure, resilient water resource. It does have an additional cost, and it seems that that's matching up with where communities' value sits. So well done to Hunter, to the region and to the community, and well done Hunter Water too. It's a difficult thing, opening up such a really technical and difficult. It is complex, the area that you work within, and opening that up for community discussion and debate, including for today. I think we can all learn a lot from it, but it's really great to see Hunter Water valuing as much the engineering and the economics in the assessment of this plan as you know, what the community wants. And it's clear that what has come through that is that the community accepts their role, in addition to your role in managing our water resources efficiently and effectively into the future. We'll flick over to our panel discussion now. I would like to introduce our expert panelists. Danielle Francis, welcome from Sydney. Danielle's the Manager of Liveable Communities at the Water Services Association Australia. Danielle has conducted years of research and advocacy on purified recycled water for drinking, including writing WASA's All Options on the Table. And again, that was a theme that has emerged out of this consultation, hasn't it? All options on the table. Danielle looks at many aspects around the world, including education, engagement, demo projects, visitor centres, and is on a global project advisory committee for the Water Research Foundation in America. Thank you for joining us today. I'd also like to introduce Roberta, disappeared off screen, but that's fine. I can do my introduction in the background. Roberta is the inaugural Chair of Local Government and Academic Director of the Hunter Research Foundation Centre at the University of Newcastle. A 30-year career as a political sociologist. Largely you're a community engagement expert, aren't you? And really about bridging that with policy and investment between communities and governments. You like to work on really the complex and tricky issues. I think that's attested by your appointment as the Independent Community Commissioner out in Western Sydney, and hopefully can bring some of those learnings home to the Hunter as well. Nationally recognised for your expertise in mediating and facilitating shared outcomes that meet both governments and stakeholders' objectives, particularly in this sensitive, contested space. Roberta was also advised on a range of water-related projects, large-scale public projects, as well as innovative community panel and citizen juries processes, currently expert advisor to Sydney Water. So welcome.
Thanks very much, Alice.
So all options on the table, that came out really strongly. Infrastructure, conservation, efficiency, recycled water, they've all been looked at and prioritised in the plan. Danielle, how do the recommendations and that set of priorities that have emerged really from the Hunter, how does that measure up in terms of where other regions and water providers have landed?
Yeah, thanks, Alice. Look, this plan is definitely in step with what we would call leading practice, and you're hearing very consistent themes with what you do sort of in other parts of Australia and in fact with the world in a few aspects. That need for all options planning, that's a really you know, common theme these days. Diversification, that's a word that's come up, and that's really key at policy level. There's been a really strong national push and international push for this need to diversify the water supply, and that's really about not putting all your eggs in one basket. And so what that tends to mean in an Australian context is that there's been quite a big shift over the last couple of decades where, you know, dams have always sort of been the backbone of our water supply, but what you're seeing in the last sort of 20 years or so is that dams are starting to be complemented by other types of water supply options that aren't so dependent on rainfall, and that's things like desalination and recycling. So, you know, desalination, most of our capital cities now have a desalination plant, and that started to appear during the millennium drought. And, you know, recycling, there's always been a lot of recycling for industry and irrigation, but you are starting to see purified recycled water for drinking starting to appear as well. There's a scheme in Perth that's currently being doubled, and there's a scheme in Queensland as well. So, you know, I think this plan, you know, and the important point to make is that this wanting to use the water that we have wisely and have safe drinking water, those are paramount priorities everywhere. You know, every water utility and every community and every government wants to absolutely protect those as well. So, you know, I think the plan is very consistent with what's happening in terms of having that need for flexibility. It will give the Hunter region a lot of options for how to make the best use of the water resources that they have, but it will also cater for those uncertain weather and climate conditions ahead. So yeah, I think it's definitely sort of consistent with the sorts of directions that you're seeing in the UK and in the US and in Africa and in Europe and in other parts of Australia as well.
Thank you. Roberta, you're an expert in engaging with communities on sensitive and contentious issues. Water can be particularly polarising because it involves trade-offs, dams, no dams, water for the environment versus the economy, user versus user. We can certainly see that in the Hunter region, and it's something that can be quite quickly fall, you know, out of, let's say, a more strategic and objective assessment and into the political realm as well because of this. In your experience, can we trust communities to stick to the values that they've told us when it could cost more on their bill?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because water is an essential service, and look, for a lot of people, we take it for granted, and we expect the taps to produce nice clean water, which they do regularly in Australia. But what happens when you start to engage with communities? And Hunter Water's done a great job in the engagement piece, and it's continuing now, isn't it, to have the conversation about what kind of options we should be looking at for water in the future. A couple of things come out of that. They do expect public authorities to keep their own house in order. So the kind of making sure we don't waste water and the leaks program and managing that's really important. But what comes out of it as well is that people are prepared to do their bit. So, I mean, Danielle will probably know some of this data too, but, you know, the amount of recycling, the amount of, you know, not using water, being, you know, really careful about water use keeps high after the drought and after the restrictions. So people are happy to do their bit as well. But I think what comes out of the community piece is the more people understand, the more they're willing to pay more, because water's about trade-offs. Like a lot of public policy decisions are about trade-offs. So where's the water for the environment? How can we use water to enhance livability? Water's not just about drinking. It's about, you know, it's about urban amenity. It's about, you know, cooling, all these kinds of things. So how do we both plan for the future, which is a really important value that people have, but how do we all contribute? People are really happy to play their part. And then, you know, if we have to pay a bit more now for some of these things that matter, like environmental outcomes, our work shows that people are happy to be involved in those conversations. So price matters, cost matters, but there's a whole lot of other issues that matter as well.
Thank you. Now, one of these contentious items in discussion and debate on water is around the use of reuse and recycled water, particularly when you're putting it in the potable water resource in for drinking. Danielle, with your view across Australia, indeed the world, how have other regions been able to get the confidence of communities to move forward on this?
Yeah, they have. Well, first of all, let's just remember that, you know, recycling for non-drinking purposes, that's extremely widespread all around Australia and all around the world. For drinking purposes, yeah, there are now over 35 cities around the world across sort of the mix of different continents, particularly in America, that have adopted purified recycled water for drinking as part of their drinking water supply. And there's about the same number again who are exploring it through demonstration plans or pretty serious studies and so on. So that number is growing over time, definitely. And, you know, let's remember, it actually is already happening in Australia. There's the groundwater replenishment scheme over in Perth, which has been operating for a few years now. And as I said, they're in the process of doubling it. And Queensland has a drought scheme as well. So I think that the thing is, the industry now, on the technical front, we have a really good knowledge of how these schemes work and all those sort of technical aspects. But we also have got much better understanding around the world and locally about how to talk to communities about these different water options, like including purified recycled water for drinking. And I think it's great that this plan that's in the Lower Hunter plan to build a demonstration plan, because a demonstration plan is just a small version of a plan. And around the world, a lot of the cities that have been considering purified recycled water for drinking as an option that have built a demonstration plan have found it's just a really invaluable way of going on the journey together with the community, because people can come and they can see the way the technology works and they can see how the treatment process works, and they can ask whatever questions it is that they want to ask, and also you can have a period of testing that you do in partnership with your health regulators and stakeholders and so on, just to confirm that it's doing everything you want to do before you make any decisions. So I think that puts the region on a great foot for future preparation and for learning for the future.
Thank you. Darren, a really innovative part of this plan was really about engaging with and learning from First Nations people in the management of water. Can you please tell us how Aboriginal people's values have been incorporated in the development of the plan and the management of water, what we've learned and what we can continue to learn from principles of connection to country?
Yeah, thanks, Alice. So we worked with the Wallatuka Institute at the University of Newcastle to help understand values of Aboriginal people and build that into the plan. It was a challenging process, particularly because COVID actually came along. So one of the biggest challenging parts of it is one of the key values is storytelling and narrative and building relationships. And the building relationship component of it was actually severely affected by COVID, because of course many of those communities are high-risk communities, and so our ability to really engage to the extent we wanted to was constrained due to that. So we did go through that exercise, and certainly it's about recognising many of the values that we've seen broadly expressed about clearly understanding that water is fundamental to all life, supporting our broader ecosystems are the key values that were expressed. We need to do more work in this space though, really, and that's something that we want to continue to do as the plan continues to be developed and reviewed, is to continue to engage, and we're including that. We're going through our next reconciliation action plan, developing our Innovate wrap, and it's going to be a key component of that. So something we'll continue to work on.
Just as an aside, I wonder if you can describe the picture behind you for the audience.
Yeah, thanks, Al. So the picture behind was an artwork that was commissioned as part of our first wrap, our Reflect wrap, and it was done by a local Indigenous artist, Roberta Fielding, and it's all for water. So it was a fantastic process that we went through, and Roberta met with a number of employees at Hunter Water to build the story around the artwork. So yeah, something we're very proud of.
Thank you. Roberta, you've been doing lots of work with Hunter councils and communities, and also some great work in Western Sydney as the Independent Community Commissioner. What's happening in terms of growth here since COVID? Is there appetite or capacity for more growth, of which of course water is an essential service and resource for that growth? And what are some of the best practice principles to ensure that we have the right planning, infrastructure and services, including water, to get the benefits of growth? And do you see some of these in the Hunter plan?
Yeah, thanks, Alice. Growth is one of those areas, whether it's housing growth or population growth or impacts on transport or amenity, that people can feel if we don't plan for growth. So growth, communities get a lot of benefit from growth, urban growth and increasing populations when it's well planned. The unplanned growth, that really is a problem for people, when they can't get on the train in the morning or they haven't got good access to services. So the management of growth is, from an infrastructure point of view, it's all in the planning and making sure that we really have investment in infrastructure to enable our communities to have the level of facilities and services that they need. Water, of course, is critical to that. And look, it is a quite contentious issue for, say, areas in Western Sydney where the water system is quite different from what we see in the Hunter. Where, because of settlement patterns, the water infrastructure is east of Parramatta in Sydney, and much of the growth is happening west of Parramatta, and so it causes the investment required in water infrastructure happens west, and so there's greater cost impacts on people in those growing communities. So it's also about sharing both the benefits and the cost of growth, and Water pricing is a very important component of that in terms of making sure that we all get the benefits of growth, but we all share whatever those costs are that are associated with that. What we see in the Hunter water plan and the planning, of course, is that really good practice around engaging with communities and understanding what are those options, how they'll support future growth and where they'll support future growth. And that expression, which I think pretty well comes from Danielle's work, or it might have been borrowed from somewhere else, that all options need to be on the table, but the importance of those options in terms of the costs and the trade-offs. And so the key to this good practice is working with the community so that they understand what the costs and trade-offs are. You know, none of us have unlimited budgets. Governments don't have them. None of us have them personally. So we make decisions, whether we're conscious of them, around those costs and trade-offs all the time. And the work that we do with councils and work that we've done here in the Hunter, the more you involve communities in understanding what things cost and where the trade-offs occur, not only are they better informed and they want to contribute to those decisions, the reputation of governmental councils or water authorities increases the more you bring communities into the complexity of the decision-making involved in supporting infrastructure growth. You're on mute, Alice, yeah. Someone had to do it.
I've got cats and kids and everything in the background here, so it's holding up so far. I think one of the other principles when you talk to communities is really an expectation that there's a joined up approach to supporting growth, to supporting development and just, you know, standards of living across government. You know, the gold standard would be across portfolios of government, levels of government, and of course between sectors as well. Darren, how does Hunter Water coordinate and collaborate across government to get that long-term joined-up approach to our region's development? A particularly pertinent question for the Hunter right now as we have that concurrent reviews of the Greater Hunter Regional Plan and the Regional Transport Plan.
Yeah, thanks, Alice. So I think the first important point is this is a whole of government plan. So this plan, you know, DPI are the lead agency. So we've been working very closely with DPI in the development of the plan, and importantly, it will go through the full government process for approval, and that is vital so that we do have buy-in from all the key state agencies in the delivery of this. We've also you know, spent a lot of time as we should engaging with local government and to get that you know, on the ground view and that regional view, both with each of the local governments within our area of operations and the joint organisation of councils. So there's lots of opportunity there, I think, to present that regional view back through to the state, and I think lots of opportunity to look at how planning for growth and infrastructure is you know, can continue to be improved with respect to the region. So I think that is one of the challenges. The region is growing and growing. Maybe clearly not growing as rapidly as Western Sydney, but it is growing rapidly, and the early indications is that it's going to probably grow more rapidly than we've seen certainly for a very long time. So I think that the relationships are there, and now it's about taking advantage of those and seeing what we can really do to deliver for the region.
I think there's some really exciting innovations too coming out of the Sydney metro area. It'd be really good to import this way. You spoke early on around the importance of water for really urban cooling, water sensitive urban design. The green grid has been quite an innovative and it's an integrator project in Western Sydney, really looking to link up the green space and the catchments and the water management as part of that. Are you guys looking at something like that?
Look, we'd love to do something like that. I think that recognition of the importance of water in the landscape and deliberately providing water landscape, I mean, the work in Western Sydney has really led that thinking, and certainly something we're looking to adopt. And you know, we're having those conversations, and it does require you know, a joined up effort from planning, so from state government, from a planning perspective, and local government, developers, and you know, obviously water providers to deliver on that outcome. So look, early days, but certainly something we're very keen to progress.
And look, it's already a massive step ahead. I mean, I must admit, when I moved to the region, a lot of the parks and playgrounds were really parched and dry. Clearly, it's quite expensive, and that does impact on urban amenity and heating and cooling because of vegetation's impact really within the water balance and the energy and the radiation balance there. So straight away, though, that front up, that longer term planning, that view to resilience, all options on the table to try to prevent us getting to that situation where we've got the dead grass on the field is where we need to be headed.
Absolutely, and it does require a policy response as well. It's not something that can be delivered just purely by an individual development, or so we need to look at how we get those policy settings right, so that the investment that's required that supports that can actually be appropriately and equitably funded.
So Danielle, managing drought and an increasingly variable climate has been a fundamental focus of the plan. It's a national and a global problem, not just the hunters. What kind of policies and reforms are also needed to support water providers like Hunter Water to face these significant challenges they plan for their communities?
Yeah, well, look, climate resilience has become and is becoming an absolutely fundamental driver for water utilities all over Australia and all over the world. You know, we know that it's getting hotter. We know that rainfall is getting more variable, and there will be more droughts, more floods, more heat waves, more bushfires, and so on. You know, there's plenty of data in the IPCC report, which Darren showed earlier, which about what's ahead. And of course, the water industry's job is to plan for that and make sure we're prepared for all those different and varied and unplannable realities, basically. So, you know, on the water supply front, we've talked about having a diversified water supply portfolio. That's really key, and this plan does a great job of that. But the water industry also can play a really big role in actually mitigating climate change as well through decarbonising, and that's through basically getting our operations down to net zero. And that can happen on big scales and little scales. It can happen on big scales in terms of our treatment processes. There is heaps of fantastic innovation happening across the water industry about things like producing renewable energy from wastewater treatment, using solar energy, producing green hydrogen. I saw a question about that in the chat, and you know, Hunter's at the leading edge of doing some of that fantastic work. There's great work happening there. And in fact, what you're seeing globally, and it's starting to catch on here in Australia, is that the water industry doesn't see itself as just the water industry anymore. We are the water and resource recovery industry. You know, we have these fabulous resources at our fingertips that we can capture and reuse and make sure we make beneficial use of. So that's really a strong policy direction, which is great. And I guess you asked about policy directions. Well, you know, governments are supporting that, and we need them to keep supporting all those things to do, and we need them to keep supporting our efforts to do greening and cooling too. I think the days when we just thought of having green, cool suburbs as a nice to have thing because it sort of makes it feel nice, it's way beyond that now. That cooling and greening that is provided by water and water infrastructure is actually a part of the architecture of our cities that helps keep them healthy and helps keep that heating down and those climate impacts down. So those things are really important. And I think we'll start to see those things shift from being a nice to do to being a need to do. We already are, really. I also just wanted to mention water literacy, because I think it's really important. It's really important that people understand what happens to water in nature, and the fact that in nature all water gets recycled, basically. And you know, there is actually very little fresh water on the earth, so we have to use what we have really valuably. And there's a bit of a back to basics movement happening in the water industry to help the community understand, you know, the way that the water cycle works naturally. And so, because it helps people understand that these new options that we're talking about, like desalination and recycling, they might seem new, but actually they really just echo what happens in nature. You know, keeping in touch with what our communities want is the other thing that I think it's really important. And Hunter's done a great job of community consultation here. And what they have, what you've found is that communities don't just want the cheapest option. They want to be minimising environmental impact. They want that proofing, and they want those things to make sure that we don't just you know, sort of use resources and get rid of them. They want that ability to reuse resources effectively.
Thank you. And Darren and Danielle touched on, I think, the particular responsibilities for the stewardship of the environment and sustainability, particularly as a public-owned corporation that Hunter Water is. What does this mean for the construction, management and operation of your own assets and the organisation? Can you tell us a little bit about some of the initiatives that Hunter Water is doing in this space?
Thanks, Alice. So the issue around climate and climate mitigation is clearly a key issue for us. We've got a a goal to be carbon neutral by 2030. At the moment, we're investing in behind the meter solar, so rolling out solar on our own assets to reduce our energy consumption, and then we're looking more broadly at how we can offset those carbon emissions. Clearly, for us, we also have a lot of direct emissions that we also have to deal with, and that's also quite a technical challenge that we're working through. The other things we're looking at with respect to the delivery of our assets is how we can obviously minimise impact, not just of construction, but how we contribute towards particularly the health of our waterways across the region, and increasingly look at not just how do we deal with the potential impacts of operations, which we've been doing for a very long time and working with communities on, but how do we work with the other stakeholders around integrated water cycle management? So looking at the health of the Hunter River in particular. So we know the Hunter River estuary is has one of the poorer water qualities of any estuary in the state, and that's from a whole range of impacts, particularly around land use planning. So how can we work with other stakeholders across the catchment to really improve the health of that waterway? Is one of our key focuses.
Thank you, Darren. Thank you, Roberta and Danielle, for that really interesting panel discussion. It's now time to throw over to the audience. I've got some questions in the Q&A and, of course, in the chat too. So I'm normally used to working in normal Zoom kind of presentations, not the webinar. So if I could encourage you to shift your questions over to the Q&A. But I have picked up some from the chat function. We've got a question here from Raja Ratnam, which is around confidence level and around drought and whether a drought event will happen over the next 3 to 5 years under the duress, particularly of climate change. So how rigorous is the prediction of likelihood when you've looked at these kind of future scenarios for your plans, Darren?
We have engaged the best hydrologists we can. We're engaged with all the key climate research, both from a state government perspective in terms of the NARCLIM project, as well as the national projects looking at climate models. And we've been working with the University of Newcastle actually around also reconstructing historic climate records back beyond the instrumental record using paleo records. So we've done all the research we can. The reality is that we are dealing with these rare events, and we're also in a dynamic time of climate change. So frankly, there isn't a high level of confidence about how frequently these rare events will occur. I talk to the hydrologists and they can give me a number, but then I'll say the uncertainty bounds on this number are enormous. So that is in essence the challenge of the plan. We cannot, they are rare. And there's two broad approaches we can take here, and this is one of the differences to what we've done this time is what we've traditionally done in water planning. Traditional water planning would say there's an acceptable risk of running out of water. We can calculate what that is. That might be 1 in 50,000 or 1 in 100,000, and we'll base our plan on that. Now, we can't reliably estimate that probability. And the other reality is, which we've seen in the most recent droughts, is it's actually not how community and governments actually respond. When we got to 50% storage, the community wasn't saying to me, that's okay, the most likely thing is it's going to rain, don't worry. What the community and governments were saying to me is, what are you going to do to ensure we don't run out of water? And the reality is that that requires you to put policy in place and deliver infrastructure, which takes time. So this is a key value judgment in the plan. If we don't want to run out of water, then we need to plan for how we're not going to run out of water. So that's one of the things we're testing. The other one, the final point I'll make is, of course, you don't need to run out of water to do enormous damage to the confidence in the region. Cape Town didn't run out of water. But they got to 3 months out from running out of water, sort of 20% storage. They lost billions of dollars of investment in economic activity because they got to such low levels. So that's the other challenge. It's not actually the risk, the damage to the region, not just running out of water, it's getting to the point where people think you might run out of water.
So Darren, we've got many questions for you. I think, we're really lucky to have you here today and talking so frankly and candidly with committee members and the community. So we're going to fire them down the line. We've got a question from Adam Turville from Mid Coast Council. So the Love Water campaign seems very successful. Have you seen an increase in water literacy across the community? Have you surveyed the community's level of water literacy? And it was also a question that I have. Have you seen community attitudes to water and the options change over time? I'm thinking about dams. It's probably one example of that too.
Look, Love Water was really about building an emotional connection with community, that provides the opportunity to have more detailed conversations. So I think it has been very, very successful. yes, we have seen community attitudes change to water, absolutely. And clearly the most recent drought was also a massive influence, and the fact that the drought was so widespread across the state, and there were lots of images about the potential effect of that clearly affected community attitudes. The most obvious impact has been the community, our community certainly, are saying they are willing to consider purified recycled water as an option. And that wasn't the case 5 years ago. It was an option that they weren't willing to consider. Now, that's not to say that we're there to do it, but they're certainly willing to consider it as an option. I think water literacy generally, yes, it has improved, but there's still a large part of the community that has low water literacy. And as clearly as something like the drought wanes in people's memories, as a water utility, we have to work even harder to continue to get that message out there.
So we've got a question on the Tomago sandbeds. To what extent do you expect that groundwater will contribute to the region's future water needs?
The Tomago sandbeds will continue to be a critical part of our water supply. So, in drought, it can provide up to 20% of our supply. And that's what happened in the most recent drought. We have explored other groundwater sources in the region, and they simply don't have the yield that's available, adequate water quality to provide a substantial change. I think the other important point about all of those groundwater sources is that they are finite resources, and extracting water from them can have, and in many cases does have, ecological and broader social impact. So that's one of the other things that needs to be taken into account.
So we've got a question from Sam Meller, Beyond Zero Emissions, and indeed there's a common theme coming up in these questions, Darren, around the integration, particularly around renewable energy, clean energy and water, which we know is locked in together. I have a question here from Sam. So interested in the industrial scale use of water and particularly hydrogen. So hydrogen, of course, is being promoted as a future fuel and export commodity for Australia and for the hydrogen. We've been identified as a New South Wales hydrogen hub and working with the federal government on hydrogen here as well. How do you see hydrogen playing into planning, and how will the emergence of the hydrogen industry impact on water and water use planning, because it does need water in that process? Do you anticipate that growing the hydrogen economy, which is a great opportunity for the region, some conflicts around water use?
Look, there's obviously that potential. I mean, I think in the current conversations, and there's a long way to go with all of this, there's a strong focus on what's green hydrogen, and what that really requires is that it's recycled water. And our experience to date has been, the proponents of the hydrogen industry are they're very clear. They want the resource to be renewable and green, and therefore extracting additional water out of the environment to feed the hydrogen production is unlikely to be acceptable. So we have 70 gigalitres a year of wastewater that we produce. Very, very keen and willing to work with proponents of hydrogen production to how we can use that as feedstock into the process.
And there's another related question. We've seen really the survey coming out of the ANU on the pumped hydro opportunity, particularly in the Upper Hunter there. Is Hunter Water involved in any discussions on projects around pumped hydro?
We're not, because the two dams, the major dams we have, the water supply dams, they're just not suitable given their location and the design of the infrastructure. So no, we aren't. But the infrastructure in the Upper Hunter that we're linking into, clearly there's lots of opportunities up there around pumped hydro.
Fantastic. Peter Morrissey, HunterNet. So again, sorry, Roberta and Danielle, they're all coming down the line for Darren here. So you've recommended some infrastructure investments, the pipe connecting the dams, the desal plant, for example. Are you looking at similar long-term multidiscipline contracts that Sydney Water has carried out recently in building 3 regional consortiums to provide services? Basically, I suppose, contestable approaches to fulfilling the needs and the priorities that you've identified in the plan.
Sorry, Alice, my connection is a little bit unstable, and so I think I got just the question regarding
really contestable approaches to delivery of water services. Is this something that Hunter Water has been looking at?
contestable approaches with respect to the services themselves or the delivery of the services?
I think it's both about sort of
Both.
building and the provision of the services.
Yeah. So I mean, in terms of the delivery of the services, yes, absolutely. We're strongly focused on making sure we can get best value. And a key part is the contestability of, and we rely heavily on our supply chain for design and construction services. And we have a strong focus on, in doing so, how we support the local economy. So we've got a set of supplier partnership principles that really outline our approach there. So they're on our website. I'm very happy to have a more detailed conversation about that and how we support the local economy.
Thank you. Flicking through there. So final questions here. We have one from David Baines, and this is in terms of all options on the table. What was the projected contribution of water coming from more distributed sources, for example, household rainwater tanks in the plan? Is this expected to grow over the planning period, and are there any major regulatory barriers to that?
So rainwater tanks currently obviously do provide an important contribution to water conservation. The current basics requirements has rainwater tanks in it. What the plan assumes is that we're getting a 70% reduction in household water use over the next 10 years. So rainwater tanks will play a part of that. We are working with key stakeholders. It's not just rainwater tanks, there's other options that are also important in terms of water efficiency. One of the things which we're keen to work with state government about is what we've seen in our region, and this has been replicated in Sydney, is the current rainwater tanks we have aren't necessarily being utilised effectively. So, roughly we think about a third of them aren't being used or only being partially used because they haven't been well installed. That pumps have been missized, and so they're not operating properly. So householders just aren't aware of this or don't have the capacity to deal with it. So one of our priorities is how do we make sure that the rainwater tanks we have are being used effectively, and how do we work with governments and local councils to ensure that when new rainwater tanks are installed, they're installed in a way so we get the biggest benefit out of them. So we think there's some real gains to be made there, and that will form a key part of how we get this 70% reduction in water conservation that we need.
Fantastic. I was really pleased to move into a place that already had 2 massive tanks there, largely for our garden use. It was fantastic to have that infrastructure already set in. And if it wasn't there, we would have taken steps to put that in ourselves as well. There's a question for you, Roberta, from Mid Coast Council, Adam. There is often a disconnect between an LGA's community strategy plan and long-term water planning. Do you have any examples of where long-term water planning has been embedded into a council's CSP? And clearly that would differ across the region, as Darren described. Part of the jurisdiction or part of the region falls under Hunter Water, but it's actually quite decentralised across the state, and many councils actually do have primary responsibility for water services.
Yeah,
again, it's about the link between the CSP and long-term water planning.
Yeah, look, there are some good examples, and Adam and I have been talking to each other in the chat during this, and I'll share some of those. But I think the broader message for the audience is that, and it was referred to in your earlier question too, Alice, that cross-government, cross-agency coordination in terms of integrated planning is just really critical in terms of the efficiency piece and making sure that we have this planning together. And every time I say it, I know it's easier to say than do. It's really a lot of the work in planning happens behind, in kind of inside authorities, inside government, and it's a tough one. It's a tough one to deliver on. But crucial to this and community strategic planning in local government is really, again, it's a whole of community plan that's about understanding the community aspirations in a locality and what everyone's contribution to those can be. So as we have with land use planning through local strategic planning statements and community strategic plans, integrating water planning, particularly as water becomes a greater priority for communities, which it definitely is, and all our research shows that, it will be really important to continue to increase that integration of planning.
Thank you. So we'll wrap up, but I do have one final question for you, Darren. Clearly, this whole plan is being framed in terms of long-term sustainability and resilience, but you're also developing it in the midst of a major disruptor with COVID. What's happening? What can you see really in the kind of data about how water use is changing in our community? I know I can give an example. We got our bill a couple of weeks ago and we've halved the level of water use relative to this time last year, which was quite surprising. But then when we dug deeper, it's really coming up to that daily battle that we're having with our children who somehow think that having a shower or bath has become optional. So I feel that while we've pumped up, certainly we're using more water here, when normally my husband and I would be sitting in an office. I think we're doing more washing, more dishwasher. However, that's been offset by no showers, that they're not smelling, but we do have the battle every night. But yeah, what's the data saying about those changes since COVID?
I love that we're advocating shorter showers anyway. Alice, maybe not no showers, but certainly shorter showers is a wonderful thing. The data at this point in time is showing a small reduction only. So there's a couple of confounding factors in all of this, and it takes some time for us to tease it out. So obviously more people are at home, and therefore household water use is going up, but that's offset by the fact they're not in their office. And there's an impact on clearly some industries. So hospitality, tourism clearly are affected. So we're seeing a reduction in water use there. So at this point in time, COVID is not having a massive impact on overall water use, and I think more broadly, what we're hearing from our customers, and it's very uneven, as we know. The impact of COVID is that in the hospitality, tourism sectors in particular, they're doing it really tough. That's not surprising. That's not flowing through to hardship, interestingly, to the extent that we thought it would. So that's something we're closely monitoring. So. Yeah, on face value, a number of the measures that are put in place to help support, and I'm not advocating any particular one of them, but they seem to be providing levels of support, but it's not flowing through to significant hardship in the community at this point in time, and that's obviously what we're all closely looking at.
Yes, incredibly interesting. And I will make them shower tonight. We are on day 2. I draw the line at that. So thank you, Roberta. Thank you, Danielle. And thank you as well, Darren, for this really interesting and below the covers understanding of the plan, its development, the priorities that have emerged, but also the very real challenges, the complexities and the trade-offs that are involved in coming up with such a plan, and particularly the really strong engagement with industry, with users, with the community in its development. So you can still have your say. 26th of September, it's up on the website. We've provided a link to the Hunter Water page up on the chat. So I do encourage you to go and have a look, or have a look at the summaries that have certainly come in your mailbox, and see what you think. Now's the opportunity to have your say. So thank you everyone for your time today, and enjoy the rest of your week. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.